The alien ship descended slowly through the thick clouds, its sleek metallic surface glinting faintly in the dim sunlight. Below, the remnants of what was once a thriving city stretched out like a graveyard of steel and concrete. The towering buildings were cracked and crumbling, their windows shattered, and vines had begun to creep up their sides as nature reclaimed the land. It was silent, almost eerily so, with only the soft whistle of the wind cutting through the ruins. Inside the ship, Cale stood at the observation deck, his sharp eyes scanning the desolate landscape below. He was tall for his species, with pale blue skin and piercing yellow eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light. His voice carried an air of superiority as he spoke to the others on the team. "This is it," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "The great achievement of humanity. Look at it now, nothing but ruins." Beside him, Lyra watched quietly. She was shorter than Cale, with soft green scales covering her body and large, curious eyes. Unlike Cale, she didn't share his arrogance. Instead, she felt a strange sense of awe as she looked down at the remains of Earth. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the way the old structures still stood, despite centuries of neglect. She wondered what stories they might tell if they could speak. The ship landed gently on the cracked pavement of what used to be a busy street. Dust swirled around the landing gear as the aliens stepped out, their boots crunching against the debris. Cale took the lead, his movements confident and deliberate. Behind him followed Vren, a younger member of the team who idolized Cale and hung on his every word. Then came Lyra, carrying a small scanning device in her hands. As they walked, Cale gestured dismissively at the broken buildings around them. "They called this progress," he sneered. "All this effort, all these resources wasted on such fragile creations. No wonder they destroyed themselves." Vren nodded eagerly, trying to mimic Cale's attitude, though his wide eyes betrayed his fascination with the scene before him. Lyra, however, wasn't listening. Her attention was drawn to the details, the faded advertisements painted on walls, the rusted cars abandoned on the streets, the piles of books scattered near the entrance of a collapsed library. Each object told a story of a civilization that had once thrived here. She bent down to pick up one of the books, brushing off the dust to reveal faded letters on the cover. Though she couldn't read the language, she could feel the weight of its meaning. "Come on, Lyra," Cale called impatiently. "We don't have time for sentimentality. This place is dead. Let's gather our data and leave." Reluctantly, Lyra set the book back down and hurried after the group. They moved deeper into the ruins, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. At one point, they passed by a massive statue lying on its side, its face half buried in the dirt. The figure appeared human, with a stern expression carved into stone. Cale paused briefly to glance at it. "Even their art is primitive," he muttered, shaking his head. But Lyra lingered behind for a moment, staring at the statue. There was something about the way it had been crafted, with care, with purpose, that made her think twice about Cale's harsh judgment. These people may have fallen, but they hadn't done so without leaving a mark. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to their story than met the eye. Unbeknownst to any of them, hidden beneath the layers of decay and forgotten history, something stirred. Something ancient, something powerful, and something that would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about this seemingly lifeless world. The alien team moved further into the ruins, their footsteps crunching against broken glass and crumbling concrete. Cale walked ahead with a confident stride, his scanner in hand, occasionally stopping to examine objects that caught his eye. To him, everything they saw was proof of humanity's failure, evidence of a species too flawed to survive its own ambitions. He picked up a rusted tool from the ground, turning it over in his hands before tossing it aside with a snort. "Primitive," he muttered under his breath. Vren followed closely behind, mimicking Cale's every move. When Cale stopped to inspect something, Vren did the same, nodding vigorously whenever his superior made a comment. "It's unbelievable how backward these humans were," Vren said, trying to sound intelligent. They wasted so much time on things that didn't matter. Lyra trailed behind them, her gaze darting around the ruins. She wasn't convinced by Cal's harsh assessment. While the others dismissed everything as useless junk, she noticed patterns in the debris, signs of careful design and purpose. Near an overturned table, she found a cracked picture frame with a faded photograph inside. It showed two smiling humans, their arms around each other. Lyra tilted her head, studying the image. Even though she didn't know who they were, she could feel the warmth of their connection. This wasn't just a relic of a failed civilization. It was a memory of life. "This place is full of junk," Cal announced loudly, kicking aside a pile of old metal scraps. "There's nothing here worth our time. Let's keep moving." He gestured for the group to follow him down a wide street lined with skeletal buildings. The wind whistled through the empty spaces where windows used to be, creating an eerie melody that sent shivers down Lyra's spine. As they walked, Vren pointed excitedly at a large billboard looming above them. Its colors had faded, but the outline of a smiling human holding a strange object was still visible. "Look at this," Vren exclaimed. They worshipped material things. No wonder they destroy themselves. Cale smirked, clearly pleased with Vren's observation. Exactly. They cared more about possessions than progress. Their downfall was inevitable. But Lyra wasn't listening. Her attention was drawn to something unusual nearby, a massive structure partially buried beneath layers of dirt and rubble. It was round like a giant sphere and covered in intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. She stepped closer, her heart pounding with curiosity. "What's this?" she asked softly, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Cale turned back when he heard her voice and rolled his eyes. "Another useless artifact," he said dismissively. "Probably some primitive monument or storage container. Don't waste your time." Lyra ignored him, pulling out her scanning device to examine the sphere more closely. As she activated the scanner, it began to beep erratically, its screen flickering wildly. Startled, she pulled it away, but the device suddenly shut off completely. She frowned, tapping it gently to see if it would restart. Nothing happened. "What's wrong with your toy?" Cale asked mockingly, walking over to join her. He glanced at the sphere briefly, then shrugged. "See, just another dead end. These humans couldn't even build something functional." Lyra hesitated, unsure what to say. Something about the sphere felt different. The symbols seemed almost alive, shifting slightly under her touch. She pressed her palm against the surface again, and this time she felt a faint vibration. Her breath caught in her throat. "Cale," she said cautiously, "I think this might be important." Cale crossed his arms, looking unimpressed. "Important? It's a lump of metal buried in dirt, hardly groundbreaking." He turned away, already losing interest. "We've got better things to do than waste time on this." Reluctantly, Lyra stepped back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something significant. The sphere radiated a quiet energy, as if it were waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. She glanced at Cale and Vren, who were now arguing about whether to explore another building, and sighed. For now, she decided to keep her thoughts to herself. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ruins, the air grew colder. The team gathered their equipment and prepared to set up camp near the sphere. None of them noticed the faint hum growing louder in the distance, or the way the symbols on the sphere began to glow brighter with each passing moment. Unbeknownst to them, the ruins weren't as lifeless as they seemed. Something ancient was stirring, watching, waiting. And soon, the arrogant aliens would learn that mocking the past came with consequences. The alien team set up camp near the strange sphere, their equipment glowing faintly in the darkening ruins. Cale busied himself organizing tools and muttering about how pointless the mission was becoming. Vren hovered nearby, eager to help but unsure of what to do. Lyra, however, couldn't take her eyes off the sphere. Its surface shimmered faintly under the dim light of their portable lanterns, and the symbols etched into it seemed to shift whenever she looked away. "It's just sitting there," Kale said loudly, breaking the silence. "Not moving, not doing anything useful. Waste of time." He threw a glare at Lyra, who had been staring at the sphere for several minutes without saying a word. "Are you going to stand there all night, or are you actually going to do something productive?" Lyra didn't respond right away. She reached out hesitantly, pressing her hand against the cool metal surface again. This time, the vibration was stronger, almost like a heartbeat. Her fingers tingled where they touched the sphere, and she felt a strange warmth spreading through her palm. "It's alive," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Kale scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Alive? Don't be ridiculous. It's a piece of junk, like everything else here. Stop wasting time and start scanning." Reluctantly, Lyra pulled out her scanner again, even though she knew it wouldn't work. Sure enough, when she turned it on, the screen flickered wildly before going dark once more. Frustrated, she tapped it a few times, hoping for a miracle. But nothing happened. "The scanner won't work on this," she admitted finally, looking up at Kale. "There's something different about it, something we don't understand." "Of course we don't understand it," Kale snapped, "because it's useless. If it were important, it would have some kind of function. Instead, it just sits there like a rock." He turned away, clearly done with the conversation. Focus on things that matter. But Lyra wasn't ready to give up. She crouched down beside the sphere, studying the symbols carefully. They weren't random shapes. They formed patterns, almost like equations or codes. She traced one of the lines with her finger, feeling a faint pulse beneath her touch. The sensation sent a shiver down her spine, and she glanced around nervously. For a moment, she thought she heard a low hum in the distance, but when she looked at Kale and Vren, neither of them seemed to notice. "Maybe it's a message," she said softly, half to herself. "Or a warning." "A warning?" Kale laughed harshly, spinning back around to face her. "What could these primitive humans possibly warn us about? How to fail spectacularly? No, thank you. I've seen enough of their so-called achievements to last a lifetime." Vren chuckled nervously, nodding along with Kale's words. But Lyra ignored them both, focusing instead on the sphere. She pressed her hands against its surface, closing her eyes as if trying to feel its secrets. The vibrations grew stronger, pulsing rhythmically now, like a heartbeat syncing with hers. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could speak, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. "What was that?" Vren yelped, stumbling backward. Kale frowned, glancing around suspiciously, probably just settling earth. "These ruins are unstable, remember." But Lyra wasn't so sure. The trembling hadn't felt natural. It had felt deliberate, almost like a response. She stared at the sphere, her heart racing. The symbols were glowing brighter now, casting soft, eerie light across the campsite. The others noticed it too, their expressions shifting from annoyance to unease. "Turn it off," Kale barked, pointing at the sphere. "Whatever it's doing, stop it." "I'm not doing anything." Lyra shot back, stepping away from the sphere. "It's reacting on its own." The humming grew louder, echoing through the ruins like a distant storm. Shadows danced across the walls of nearby buildings, twisting and shifting unnaturally. Kale grabbed his scanner, aiming it at the sphere, but the device sparked violently and died in his hands. "This is impossible," he shouted, throwing the useless tool to the ground. Lyra watched in awe as the sphere began to rotate slowly, its glow intensifying with each passing second. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that pulsed with energy. Deep within the ruins, lights flickered to life, first dimly, then brightly, illuminating streets and structures that had been dark for centuries. "What did you do?" Kale demanded, rounding on Lyra. "I didn't do anything," she insisted, her voice rising. "It's waking up." The truth hit them all at once. The ruins weren't abandoned. They weren't dead. They had been waiting. And now, thanks to the aliens' interference, whatever slept beneath the surface was beginning to stir. The ruins came alive around them, bathed in a soft glow that seemed to pulse with energy. Streetlights flickered on one by one, their pale beams cutting through the darkness like ghostly fingers. Buildings that had appeared dead and crumbling moments ago now revealed sleek metallic surfaces beneath layers of grime, as if shedding centuries of decay. The air hummed with power, and the ground vibrated faintly underfoot. It was as though the city itself was awakening from a long slumber. Cale stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at the glowing sphere, which continued to spin slowly, its symbols shifting and rearranging in patterns too complex for him to comprehend. This can't be happening," he stammered, his usual arrogance faltering. For the first time since they'd landed, he looked uncertain, afraid even. Vren clutched his scanner tightly, though it was useless now. His voice trembled as he spoke. "What's going on? Did we trigger something?" Lyra didn't answer. She was too busy watching the transformation unfold. The streets cleared themselves of debris, as if invisible hands were sweeping away the remnants of time. Windows that had been shattered and dark now gleamed with light, reflecting the eerie brilliance of the awakened city. Even the wind seemed to change, carrying with it a low, melodic hum that resonated deep within her chest. "It's not just a ruin," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the growing hum. "It's alive." "Alive?" Cale snapped, turning to glare at her. "That's ridiculous. Cities don't come alive. This has to be some kind of automated system, a defense mechanism or something. Then why does it feel like it's watching us?" Lyra countered, her gaze darting between the glowing structures and the sphere. She couldn't shake the sensation that they were no longer alone. The ruins weren't just reacting, they were responding. Before Cale could respond, the humming grew louder, almost deafening. A section of the street ahead began to shift, splitting apart to reveal a hidden chamber beneath the surface. From the depths emerged a faint blue light, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. The team instinctively took a step back, their breaths quickening. "What is that?" Vren whispered, his voice shaking. "Is it dangerous?" Cale clenched his fists, trying to regain control of the situation. "We're scientists," he said sharply. "We don't panic. Whatever this is, we'll analyze it and figure it out." But his words lacked conviction, and his hands betrayed his nervousness as they twitched at his sides. Lyra stepped forward cautiously, drawn to the light despite her fear. As she approached, the chamber opened wider, revealing a series of intricate panels covered in the same glowing symbols as the sphere. They pulsed in sync with the light, forming patterns that felt almost intentional. She reached out hesitantly, but before she could touch anything, a mechanical voice echoed through the air. "Unauthorized presence detected." The aliens froze, their hearts pounding. The voice was calm but firm, speaking in a language none of them recognized. Yet somehow, they understood its meaning perfectly, as if the words bypassed their ears and entered their minds directly. "Who's there?" Cale demanded, his bravado returning slightly. "Show yourself." The blue light brightened, and from the chamber rose a humanoid figure cloaked in shimmering armor. Its face was obscured by a smooth, reflective visor, but its presence radiated authority. Behind it, more figures emerged, each identical in appearance, moving with silent precision. "These must be the creators," Lyra breathed, her voice filled with awe. "But they don't look human." One of the figures stepped forward, raising a hand to silence Cale before he could speak again. "You have disturbed the legacy of Earth," it said, its tone measured but stern. "Explain your purpose here." Cale opened his mouth to argue, but Lyra interrupted him, stepping forward with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," she said quickly. "We came to study this place, to learn about the humans who once lived here. We didn't know it was still active." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. "The humans are gone," it replied. But their guardians remain. You will explain your actions or face the consequences. Kale bristled at the implication of punishment, but Lyra placed a hand on his arm, silently urging him to stay calm. She turned back to the figure, her expression earnest. We're sorry for intruding. We didn't understand what this place truly was. Please, let us leave peacefully. For a moment, the figure said nothing, its reflective visor unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it lowered its hand. Your intentions will be evaluated, it said finally. Until then, you are confined to this area. The guardians moved closer, surrounding the aliens with an air of quiet menace. Kale clenched his jaw, clearly furious at being trapped, but Lyra simply nodded, accepting their fate. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. They hadn't been attacked outright. Perhaps there was still hope for understanding. As the guardians stood watch, the glowing sphere fell silent, its symbols dimming until only a faint glow remained. The city around them settled into an uneasy stillness, waiting to see what would happen next. The aliens stood frozen under the watchful eyes of the guardians, their breaths shallow and their hearts racing. The glowing sphere had gone quiet, but its faint light still pulsed softly, as if reminding them of the power it held. Kale glared at the armored figures surrounding them, his pride wounded by their confinement. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. We're scientists, not criminals. How dare they treat us like this? Lyra ignored him, her focus entirely on the guardians. She studied their movements carefully, noting how they remained perfectly still yet alert, like statues brought to life. Their armor shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim glow of the city around them. Despite their intimidating presence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. These beings were clearly advanced, far beyond anything her people had ever encountered. One of the guardians stepped forward again, its reflective visor tilting slightly toward Lyra. You claim ignorance, it said, its voice calm but firm. Yet your actions suggest otherwise. Why did you tamper with the core? The core? Kale interrupted, his tone sharp. That thing. It's just a relic. We didn't know it was important. The guardian turned its head toward him, and though its face was hidden behind the visor, Lyra could feel its gaze piercing through Kale. The core is the heart of this system, it explained. It safeguards the legacy of Earth. Your interference has triggered protocols long dormant. Vren swallowed nervously, clutching his useless scanner tightly. So, we messed up, he said weakly. But we didn't mean to. Can't you just turn it off or something? It is not a machine to be switched off, the Guardian replied. It is a living archive, a repository of knowledge left behind by humanity. Its purpose is to preserve their achievements and protect their story from those who would exploit it. Lyra's eyes widened as she processed the Guardian's words. Wait, humanity left this behind. But where did they go? They ascended, the Guardian answered simply. They surpassed the limitations of physical existence and became something greater. This city, these ruins, are all that remain of their tangible world. Kale scoffed, crossing his arms defiantly. Ascended? That's impossible. No species could achieve such a thing. The Guardian didn't respond to his skepticism. Instead, it turned back to Lyra, who seemed genuinely curious rather than dismissive. Your kind does not understand the concept of transcendence, it said, but perhaps that is why you are here, to learn. Lyra nodded slowly, her mind racing with questions. If humanity left this place behind, why are you still here? What is your role? We are stewards, the Guardian replied, created to maintain and defend what remains. When the humans departed, they entrusted us with their legacy. We ensure that it is preserved and protected from those who lack respect for its significance. Kale rolled his eyes, muttering something about overblown security measures, but Lyra silenced him with a sharp look. She turned back to the Guardian, her expression earnest. We may have made a mistake coming here, she admitted, but we didn't come to harm anything. We wanted to learn about humanity to understand them better. Isn't that what they would have wanted? The Guardian paused, as if considering her words. Then it raised a hand, gesturing toward the glowing sphere. The core holds fragments of their history, their culture, their wisdom. If you truly seek understanding, you may access it, but only if your intentions are pure. Kale opened his mouth to protest, but Lyra quickly stepped forward. We accept, she said firmly, cutting him off. Please, let us see what humanity left behind. The Guardian studied her for a moment longer before nodding. Very well. Approach the core, but know this. Deception will not be tolerated. As the Guardian stepped aside, Lyra moved cautiously toward the sphere, her heart pounding with anticipation. Kale followed reluctantly, his arms crossed and his jaw tight with frustration. Vren trailed behind, looking both nervous and excited. When Lyra reached the sphere, she placed her hand gently against its surface. The symbols immediately lit up, swirling and shifting into new patterns. A soft hum filled the air, and images began to project around them. Scenes of bustling cities, towering skyscrapers, and smiling faces. Humanity's story was unfolding before their eyes, vibrant and alive despite the centuries that had passed. For the first time, Kale fell silent, his arrogance giving way to wonder. Even he couldn't deny the beauty of what he was seeing. As the visions continued, Lyra felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the chance to witness humanity's legacy, but for the reminder that there was always more to learn if one was willing to listen. The images projected by the glowing sphere surrounded the aliens, filling the air with vivid scenes of humanity's past. Towering cities stretched into the sky, their streets alive with people and vehicles. Children laughed as they played in parks, while artists painted murals on towering walls. The sounds of music, laughter, and conversation echoed faintly, creating an atmosphere so real that it felt like stepping back in time. Lyra watched in awe, her eyes wide with wonder. She could feel the weight of what she was seeing, not just the achievements of humanity, but their spirit. These weren't just ruins, they were remnants of a civilization that had thrived, dreamed, and created. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Kale, however, remained skeptical. He crossed his arms and frowned, studying the projections with a critical eye. These are just recordings, he said dismissively. They don't prove anything about their so-called greatness. Any species can build cities or make art. The Guardian standing nearby turned its head toward him, its reflective visor gleaming in the dim light. You misunderstand, it said calmly. This is not merely a record of their accomplishments. It is a reflection of their essence, their ability to adapt, innovate, and unite. Humanity was flawed, yes, but they learned from their mistakes and reached for the stars. Vren glanced nervously between Kale and the Guardian, unsure whose side to take. So, they really did ascend? He asked hesitantly. Like, they became better. They transcended their physical limitations, the Guardian explained. Through unity and understanding, they evolved beyond the need for bodies, leaving this world behind as a testament to their journey. Kale snorted, clearly unimpressed. Sounds like a fairy tale. If they were so advanced, why didn't they take this core thing with them? Why leave it here to collect dust? The core was never meant to leave Earth, the Guardian replied. It is a gift, a message to those who come after. A reminder that even in imperfection, there is potential for greatness. As the Guardian spoke, the images shifted again, showing moments of struggle and hardship. Wars raged, natural disasters struck, and people suffered. But through it all, humanity persevered, finding ways to rebuild and grow stronger. Lyra felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched these stories unfold. Despite their flaws, humans had refused to give up. They had fought for hope, for connection, for something greater than themselves. This changes everything, Lyra murmured, turning to Kale. We've been wrong about them. They weren't primitive. They were incredible. Kale scowled, unwilling to admit he might have misjudged humanity. Even if they were impressive, what does it matter now? They're gone. This place is just a museum. Before Lyra could respond, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. The sphere glowed brighter, and the symbols on its surface began to rearrange themselves once more. The Guardians stepped closer, forming a protective circle around the aliens. One of them raised a hand, signaling for silence. "The core has detected further interference," the lead Guardian announced. "Your presence continues to disrupt its systems." "What does that mean?" Vren asked anxiously, gripping his scanner tightly. "Are we in trouble?" "It means your actions have consequences," the Guardian replied. "The protocols are escalating. If balance is not restored, the core will initiate defensive measures." Cal's frustration boiled over. Defensive measures? What does that even mean? "Are you threatening us?" "We do not threaten," the Guardian said firmly. "We protect. Your choices determine the outcome." Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," she said urgently, "we'll stop interfering. Just tell us how to fix this." The Guardian studied her for a moment before nodding. "The core requires recalibration. You must assist in reversing the disruption caused by your tampering." Cal groaned, throwing up his hands. "Now we have to fix their junk too. This mission keeps getting worse." The aliens worked together, their hands moving carefully over the glowing sphere as they followed the sequence displayed by its shifting symbols. Lyra focused intently, her fingers tracing the patterns with precision, while Cal grumbled under his breath but did his part reluctantly. Vren hovered nearby, holding tools and offering suggestions whenever he thought it might help. The sphere responded to their efforts, its light pulsing steadily, almost like it was breathing. As they worked, the Guardians stood watch, their armored forms silent and unwavering. The lead Guardian's visor occasionally tilted toward the team, as if monitoring their progress. "You are close," it said finally, its voice calm but firm. "Do not falter now." Lyra nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was at stake. If they failed, the core would initiate defensive measures, and none of them wanted to find out what that meant. "We're almost there," she whispered, more to herself than to the others. "Just a little more." Cal, however, was growing impatient. "This is taking too long," he muttered, his frustration bubbling over. "How do we even know this is going to work? What if it's just another trap?" "It's not a trap," Lyra replied sharply, glancing up at him. "They're giving us a chance to fix this. Don't ruin it with your negativity." Before Cal could retort, the sphere emitted a soft chime, and the symbols stopped shifting. A beam of light shot upward from its center, illuminating the ruins around them. The trembling ground steadied, and the hum that had filled the air faded into silence. For a moment, everything was still. Then the lead Guardian stepped forward, its reflective visor gleaming. "The disruption has been contained," it announced. "Balance has been restored. For now." Vren let out a sigh of relief, slumping slightly as the tension eased. "That's it. We did it." "Not entirely," the Guardian replied. "Your actions have triggered protocols that cannot be undone. You must leave this place immediately and never return." Cal straightened up, his pride flaring again. "Leave? After all this trouble, you're just kicking us out. We came here to learn, not to be chased away like criminals." The Guardian turned its head toward him, its presence commanding. "You sought knowledge but showed no respect for what you found. Humanity entrusted us to protect their legacy, and we will fulfill that duty, even if it means ensuring you never set foot here again." Lyra stepped forward, her expression earnest. "We understand now. We see how wrong we were to judge humanity without truly knowing them. Please, believe us when we say we won't make the same mistake again." The Guardian studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Your sincerity is noted. However, trust must be earned. Your ship will be repaired, and you will depart. Whether you choose to honor humanity's legacy is up to you." With that, The Guardians began to move, their movements fluid and precise. They gestured for the aliens to follow, leading them back toward their damaged vessel. As they walked through the illuminated streets, the ruins seemed to glow with a quiet dignity, as if bidding them farewell. Kale lagged behind, his jaw clenched tightly. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We should have taken what we wanted while we had the chance." Lyra shot him a sharp look. "And risked destroying something incredible. Is that really what you think science is about? Taking without understanding?" Kale didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Vren glanced between them nervously, unsure of what to say. The walk back to the ship felt longer than before, weighed down by unspoken thoughts and lingering questions. When they reached the vessel, the Guardians stood aside, watching silently as the aliens boarded. One of them approached Lyra before she entered, holding out a small object, a smooth metallic disc etched with familiar symbols. "Take this," it said. "It contains fragments of humanity's story. Learn from it, and perhaps one day your people will earn the right to return." Lyra accepted the disc with trembling hands, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "We'll remember." As the ship lifted off, the ruins below faded into the distance, their lights dimming once more. Inside the vessel, the team sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Kale stared out the window, his expression unreadable, while Vren fiddled anxiously with his scanner. Lyra held the disc tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time, she realized that their journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. The alien ship soared through the atmosphere, leaving Earth far behind. Inside, the cabin was quiet, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts. Lyra sat in a corner, holding the metallic disc given to her by the Guardian. Its surface shimmered faintly, and the symbols etched into it seemed to shift subtly, as if alive. She traced her fingers over it gently, wondering what secrets it held. For the first time since the mission began, she felt a sense of purpose, not just as a scientist, but as someone entrusted with something precious. Kale, on the other hand, paced back and forth near the control panel, his frustration boiling over. "This is absurd," he muttered, shaking his head. "We came all this way, risked everything. And for what? A lecture from some glorified machines, and a useless trinket." "It's not useless," Lyra replied firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's a gift, a piece of humanity's story, something they thought was worth sharing." Kale scoffed, crossing his arms. "A story? What good is a story when we could have had real knowledge, technology, advancements, things that actually matter?" Lyra stood up, clutching the disc tightly. "Stories matter, Kale. They teach us who we are, and who we can be. Humanity didn't just leave behind buildings or machines. They left behind their dreams, their struggles, their hopes. That's what makes them extraordinary." Kale rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Dreams don't build civilizations, Lyra. Actions do. And from what I saw, humanity failed at both." Before Lyra could respond, Vren chimed in nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. Maybe there's room for both. Like they built amazing things, but they also had stories that inspired them to keep going." Kale shot him a glare, silencing him instantly. The cabin fell quiet again, the weight of their disagreement hanging heavily in the air. Lyra sighed, realizing there was no point arguing further. Kale's arrogance ran deep, and she doubted anything she said would change his mind. Instead, she focused on the disc, determined to uncover its secrets. As the ship drifted further from Earth, the Guardian's words echoed in her mind. "Learn from it, and perhaps one day, your people will earn the right to return." She knew this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a responsibility. Whatever was stored on the disc, it had the potential to reshape how her people viewed humanity and themselves. Back on the control deck, Kale fumed silently, staring out at the stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been humiliated, made to look small and insignificant. The thought gnawed at him, fueling his anger. "We should have taken more," he muttered under his breath. "We could have forced them to give us access to the core. All that knowledge, wasted." Vren glanced at him nervously but said nothing. He had seen enough of Cal's temper to know better than to argue. Instead, he busied himself checking the ship's systems, though his mind kept drifting back to the ruins. The glowing streets, the towering structures, the guardians, they had all seemed so alive, so purposeful. He couldn't help but wonder if Cal was wrong about humanity. Maybe greatness wasn't just about power or technology. Maybe it was about something deeper. Hours passed, and the ship continued its journey home. Lyra finally decided to examine the disk more closely. She connected it to a small portable console, careful not to damage it. At first, nothing happened, but then the screen flickered to life, displaying a series of images and text. It was written in an unfamiliar language, but somehow she understood it, as if the disk itself was translating for her. The files contained fragments of human history, art, music, and philosophy. There were recordings of speeches, poems, and songs, each one filled with emotion and meaning. Lyra felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to a haunting melody played on an instrument she didn't recognize. It was beautiful, not because it was complex, but because it carried the soul of its creators. "This is incredible," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. She called Vren over to show him, and together they marveled at the contents of the disk. Even Cal paused briefly to glance at the screen, though he quickly turned away, muttering something about primitive nonsense. But Lyra didn't care. She knew the truth now. Humanity wasn't just a relic of the past. They were a beacon of possibility, and she was determined to share their story with her people, no matter how long it took. The journey back to their home planet felt longer than the trip to Earth. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through the vast emptiness of space, the stars outside the windows shining cold and distant. Inside, the mood remained tense, with each member of the team lost in their own thoughts. Lyra spent most of her time studying the disk, uncovering more fragments of humanity's story. Each piece she discovered filled her with a deeper sense of wonder and responsibility. Cal, however, grew increasingly restless. He paced the cabin, his frustration simmering just below the surface. This whole mission was a waste, he muttered, glaring at the glowing screen of the console where Lyra was working. "We came for knowledge, not bedtime stories." "They're not just stories," Lyra replied calmly, keeping her focus on the screen. "They're lessons about resilience, creativity, and hope. Things we could all learn from." Cal rolled his eyes, clearly uninterested. Hope doesn't power ships or build empires. If humanity was so great, why did they abandon their own world? "They didn't abandon it," Lyra said firmly, turning to face him. "They evolved. They became something greater than themselves. Isn't that what every species should strive for?" Cal opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself, shaking his head instead. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, storming off toward the control deck. Vren watched him go, then turned to Lyra with a nervous smile. "He'll come around," Vren said hesitantly. Maybe once he sees how amazing this stuff is." Lyra nodded, though she wasn't convinced. Cal's arrogance ran too deep, and she doubted anything would change his mind. Still, she refused to let his negativity dampen her spirits. The disk had given her a gift, a glimpse into the heart of humanity, and she was determined to share it with her people, no matter how difficult the task might be. As the days passed, Lyra continued to explore the contents of the disk, discovering new wonders with each file she opened. There were recordings of human voices telling stories of courage and sacrifice, images of art created to inspire and connect, and even fragments of scientific breakthroughs that had shaped their world. Each discovery reinforced her belief that humanity's legacy was far greater than anyone on her team, or her planet, had ever imagined. Finally, the ship approached their home planet, its familiar blue-green surface coming into view through the windows. As they prepared to land, Lyra gathered the team in the main cabin to discuss their next steps. She held up the disc, her expression serious but hopeful. "This isn't just for us," she said. "It's for everyone. Humanity left this behind because they believed others could learn from it. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to share it." Cale crossed his arms, his scowl deepening. "And what exactly do you plan to do? Show everyone some old songs and paintings. That won't change anything." "It will if we let it," Lyra countered. "These aren't just songs or paintings. They're pieces of a bigger picture. A reminder that greatness comes from understanding, not domination. Maybe if we start sharing their story, we can begin to see things differently." Vren nodded enthusiastically, finally finding his voice. "She's right. Think about it. If we can show people how humanity achieved so much, maybe it'll inspire us to do better too." For a moment, Cale looked like he might argue again, but something in Lyra's tone made him hesitate. He glanced at the disc, then at the determination in her eyes, and sighed. "Fine," he said grudgingly. "Do what you want, but don't expect me to stand around and watch." Lyra smiled faintly, knowing that was the best she could hope for. For now. As the ship touched down on their planet, she felt a surge of determination. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. Humanity's story was a gift, and she intended to honor it by spreading its message of hope and possibility. The moment the ship landed, Lyra was the first to step out onto the familiar soil of her home planet. The air smelled fresh, and the sky above stretched wide and endless. But instead of feeling relief at being back, she felt a weight on her shoulders, a responsibility to share what she had learned. Behind her, Cale and Vren followed, each carrying their own thoughts about the mission. As they walked toward the main research facility, Lyra clutched the disc tightly in her hand. She knew that convincing others to listen wouldn't be easy. Her people valued strength and progress above all else, often dismissing softer ideas like hope or unity as unnecessary. But she also knew that humanity's story wasn't just about those things. It was about survival, innovation, and the courage to dream beyond limits. If she could show them that, maybe they would understand. Inside the facility, a group of scientists and officials gathered to hear their report. Cale stepped forward first, his tone sharp and dismissive as he described Earth as nothing more than a graveyard of broken structures. "There's nothing there worth pursuing," he concluded, folding his arms. "We should focus our resources elsewhere." Lyra waited patiently for him to finish, then stepped forward, holding up the disc. "That's not the whole story," she said firmly, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "Yes, Earth is a ruin, but it's also a monument to what humanity achieved. They didn't just build cities, they built connections. They didn't just create technology, they created meaning. And before they left, they entrusted us with this." She connected the disc to a large display screen, and the images and sounds of humanity filled the room. Music played softly, its melody both haunting and beautiful. Paintings and sculptures appeared on the screen, rich with color and emotion. Recordings of human voices told stories of struggle and triumph, of failure and redemption. For a moment, the room fell silent, everyone captivated by what they were seeing. One of the officials, an older scientist named Rin, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. This is incredible," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "They didn't just survive, they thrived. How did they do it?" "They worked together," Lyra replied. "Even when they fought, even when they failed, they kept trying. They believed in something greater than themselves. That's why they left behind this legacy, not to boast, but to teach." Cale shifted uncomfortably in the corner, clearly uneasy with the attention Lyra was receiving. But no one seemed to notice. The room buzzed with excitement as the scientists began discussing the implications of what they had seen. Some suggested studying humanity's methods to improve their own society, while others talked about sharing the story with the rest of the planet. Vren grinned, looking proud of Lyra. "You did it," he whispered as the meeting broke up. "You made them see." Lyra shook her head modestly. "Not me. Humanity did it. I just gave them a chance to speak." Over the following weeks, Lyra dedicated herself to spreading humanity's story. She traveled across the planet, showing the disc to anyone who would listen. At first, many were skeptical, but as they watched and listened, they began to change. Artists drew inspiration from human creativity. Engineers studied their innovations, and leaders found new ways to unite their people. Kale, however, distanced himself from it all. He continued his work as if nothing had happened, though Lyra noticed a slight softening in his demeanor over time. Maybe he would never fully admit it, but she hoped some part of him had been moved. As Lyra stood one evening under the stars, gazing at the distant glow of Earth's sun, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Humanity's legacy had touched her, and through her, her people. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it reminded her that greatness came not from arrogance, but from understanding. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful, not just for her world, but for the universe beyond. Somewhere out there, humanity's light still shone, guiding those willing to follow it.